This is Hidden Killers Live with Tony Bruschi, Stacey Cole, and Todd Michaels.
Let's move over to the Gilgo Beach murders. One of the cases that never was leaving the public's imagination, and also sets 11 sets of remains found along Ocean Parkway. Families waiting years for answers, and a suspect who seemed to live in plain sight. Rex Heuermann, Long Island architect, now stands accused of killing 7 women between 1993 and 2011. This week, the judge ruled that all 7 charges will be tied together, a decision that could shape the entire outcome of the case. Eric Faddis, obviously, you are here to help us break this down. That ruling that they made this week, for more than a year, the defense fought to sever that sprawling case into several different cases, arguing each murder was too different to be lumped together. But the judge, Timothy Mazie, ruled that the murders are inextricably interwoven, and prosecutors will get to present them as one long pattern instead of 7 small battles. There's now one giant war. It's more than a technicality. It changes how jurors will experience the case. They won't see a collection of isolated deaths. They'll hear the state's theory of a single predator operating across decades and a pattern of behavior. What is this ruling? How does this reshape the entire trial before a jury is even seated, before we even have a court date, really?
I think it's a huge ruling, and I think it's going to be really problematic for the defense because, when a jury hears about one alleged murder, they're already getting shivers. I mean, it's already an uncomfortable situation to be in, and you start looking sideways at the accused. Did he do it? Could he have done this? But when you hear about multiple alleged murders with a lot of similarities between them, you look at the type of alleged victim. They were all sex workers. You look at the locale. Most of them were located within a specific locale, their bodies. There are overlap in terms of the evidence among the murders, including vehicles used and including DNA evidence as well. And so, as defense, it's hard to say, hey, my guy didn't do any of these multiple murders. It's just a huge conspiracy. Well, why, person being charged with like 11 murders or so automatically has a huge disadvantage on the defense side, way harder than defending a single murder.
Because at the end of the day, in this case, it's not an all or nothing verdict that's going to come in. They're going to look at all of these charges, are they not, for each individual crime? The jury, correct me if I'm wrong, they could in theory come back and say, well, we think you're guilty of this one, and this one, but not that one, this one, and the one over here.
Oh, they absolutely could. And that'll be the jury's responsibility. They will have to determine each individual charge. And I bet defense is going to request a limiting instruction, which is where the judge says to the jury, hey, if you find evidence of murder 1, that the number 1 count, that doesn't mean you can use that evidence in and of itself to convict him of the second count of murder. However, jurors are human beings, and I think they're going to look at this in a more holistic fashion, which is a problem for the defense, but could give the defense some kind of out on appeal should there be a conviction.
Jurors are human beings, and so are the victims here, obviously, in this. Unfortunately, our society doesn't feel that way half the time about sex workers. And clearly, whoever killed these people did not look at them as human beings as well. Is this... I totally understand the argument of this could easily get a conviction and weigh it stronger for the prosecution, but does it denigrate or lessen the value of the lives of these victims by lumping them all into one big pile of sex workers?
It's an important question because you got to look at this from the perspective of the victims' families. If you have one trial where they're trying to convict somebody of killing your loved one, that's sort of center stage. Your loved one's memory is going to be center stage as well. But when you have multiple alleged victims, there's a concern that things can kind of get lost in this murky murder soup, which is a horrible thing to think about. But, and also, does the prosecution see spend more time on perhaps the stronger charges and perhaps kind of call in the less stronger charges. You have that concern when there is a trial that involves so many alleged acts over the course of the better part of 2 decades.
And I want to stress this because the similarities in these victims' deaths were not all identical. And that's where I was a little, I don't want to say surprised, but I just didn't know where it was going to go with the judge's decision this week. The defense argued that the cases had nothing in common. The first victim from 1993 stabbed, others strangled, some dismembered, some wrapped in burlap. And obviously we know the burlap ones had hairs of the Heuermann family on them, pretty much all of them. And the timeline stretched almost 20 years. I mean, their position was that there was no true signature, and putting them together would unfairly prejudice a jury. They even floated 5 separate trials to keep things more isolated. Obviously, they lost that motion. Again, I do think, in my opinion, I think Rex has a lot to do with this, but again, I'm looking at this going, are they jumping the gun on trying to connect all this stuff, and will it backfire in the end? Because I feel like the defense, and in some ways, this gave the defense some pretty strong arguments of the differences in all of these cases. And they better have pretty strong evidence on each and every single one of these murders that ties it to Rex, not just some collective, well, it looks like kind of could have. I mean, the hairs on the burlap ones are certain, but I don't know about the others. Are they tying some of these in here to stronger pieces because it will make that case stronger rather than being tried on its own?
100%. I think that's absolutely the approach the prosecution is taking. And you're right, it gives rise to this concern that when the jury's looking at this case back in the deliberation room and they're saying, hey, I think there's enough evidence beyond a reasonable doubt of the first murder and the second murder. Well, I'm not so sure, but let's err on the side of caution and convict him of that anyway. Well, that presents a tremendous fairness issue. It presents a tremendous due process issue and significant appellate issues as well. So you got to be careful of overplaying your hand. Yes, Stacey.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. No, but isn't there a bit of public pressure that they want him to be guilty of all of these? So if he's guilty of one, we kind of need to blanket it, because if we don't, there's another serial killer out there who could still be loose. Isn't this more for public pressure?
It's a critical point, and it's something, if I was defense counsel, I'd be arguing during closing, saying that, hey, look, the government has all of these dead bodies, and they can't solve those cases.
Right.
But here we have this scapegoat, and we think they think they can tie him to a handful of misdeeds, and so let's add on all of our unsolved stuff to make us look like heroes and say, hey, we got the guy, we got him, and we solved all these murders from decades ago, when really they better come with the evidence if they're going to take that approach, because simply insinuation does give rise to the specter that they're just trying to get some homicide cases off their desk and sort of look like the hero.
That's what it feels like, honestly. And in no way am I trying to downplay Rex Heuermann. I think he's certainly tied to some of these without a doubt. And if you were just to look at some of the others and go, yeah, I mean, that's a probability. But then you also take into account the sheer population in that area of the country, New York, Long Island, all that. You have more people condensed in one little spot than most any other place in the United States. You have a lot of people, a lot of death, a lot of murder around there just because of having that many people there. And it's not uncommon that there are deaths and murders on that seedy side of the world. People don't like BS. People don't like being lied to. People don't like cops trying to spin a story to fit their narrative, which we've already seen in this, or I guess lack of action in this case for quite some time, why it took forever to actually get to a conviction in this case, or a charge in this case. I'm looking at this and I'm feeling I'm feeling like they're going about this the wrong way. I really do. I feel like you could very easily get a jury, because you could just as easily get a jury in this that's going to go, we think you're stretching the limits over here quite a bit, so why should we believe anything you're saying over here?
Oh, totally. So the prosecution's credibility is super important with this jury. If they overextend, if they overplay their hand, like you said, it can call into question how a jury sees the reliability of the rest of their evidence. And if I'm defense counsel, perhaps I'm arguing something like, this case is about overkill, but it's not my client's overkill. It's the government who is trying to pin on the scapegoat all of these additional charges that they couldn't solve otherwise. And if you can't, place any faith in those accusations, how much faith can you really place in what the government sees as some more solid accusations?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Look, he's guilty. In my opinion, he's guilty of several of these. Is he guilty of all of them? We don't know. But there are several other cases that they have not tied to him yet that are just sitting out there kind of in speculation. Will they add this? Won't they add this? And may end up being tied to this at the end of the day. But it seems like a very tightrope that they have to be walking on right now, especially as this leads up to trial too. We still don't have a trial date. We don't even know when this trial will take place. Estimate, in your opinion, what would you think? Next year at some point? Or, could this play out for several more years with the possibility of them throwing more victims onto this?
I'm hopeful that we'll reach some kind of finality in 2026. That being said, one single murder case can be pushed out for months, if not years. We're talking multiple murder cases all combined into one. And on top of that, if they add charges, if they add alleged victims, that can start the whole thing over again because the defense has to investigate a brand new murder case. And so we might not see any resolution for these victims' families and for Rex until 2027 or possibly beyond.
So what is the definition of a speedy trial then? Because not that I'm defending Rex Heuermann, but how long can somebody remain behind bars without their trial taking place?
It's a very important question. It comes up a lot, Stacey. So typically there is what's called a statutory right to speedy trial, which is in the state's law. And then there's a constitutional right to speedy trial. Statutory right to speedy trial is usually something like 6 months, but there are exceptions. And sometimes the defense agrees to waive it. In fact, commonly the defense would agree to waive their statutory right to speedy trial to do additional investigation, get prepared for trial. The constitutional one is much more vague and unclear. It's kind of like within a reasonable amount of time, and you look at other cases and say, hey, it's been longer than this case, but less long than this case. Does that result in a constitutional violation? So certainly that could come into play as we approach 2026. And if it goes longer than that, certainly we're having concerns about speedy trial at that point. But there's usually not a great black and white rule for that, except on the statutory side, which has a ton of exceptions.
Gotcha. Thank you.
On the tightrope that they're walking here, the forensics are on the front line here. The DNA, sequencing and the process that they're using is unlike anything most jurors have seen. Investigators used whole genome sequencing. Of course, we all know what that is, right? It's a first in New York murder trials. It is a reliable science. It's just a new science. And when anything is new, people are going to have questions. To match degraded hairs from multiple victims to Heuermann. They also say they found female hairs belonging to his wife on some of the victims, even though she was out of town at the time of the murder, suggesting transfer from basically the Heuermann household and Heuermann, Rex, from the house to Rex to the bodies to the burlap sacks. The defense calls it magic science, and obviously it's not magic science. It's creative use of words. They're trying to make it sound like this is junk science.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Bruschi and the Hidden Killers podcast.